LinkedIn Echo Chamber. This is Emma's like Team Spirit. This week I've got Matt with me. Matt, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Good. Well, welcome and thank you for the support. So, Matt, I've been wanting to do this series on like a day in the life. Maybe it's like a week in the life of senior data leaders, and you've been on my list. So, thanks for the support and thanks for agreeing to this. It's the first time you've been with me, so we kick off with an intro, if that's okay, please. So, for about 60 seconds, maybe tell everyone what you've been doing for the last 20 years.
Yeah, sure, no worries. So I am currently the Global Director of Data and AI at JD Sports, which is very new. But yeah, the last 20 years, I started out in a marketing agency and basically progressively moved more and more into data. And yeah, the last kind of 5+ years has been basically heading up data functions at the likes of Pret, Eurostar, other kind of large kind of companies, primarily retail, travel, hospitality, but yeah, basically trying to help them to do more and more with data.
Good. So, Matt, my goal of this series is to try and explain to people what this job is like, this senior data role. I know you move in chief data officer circles and you have different presenting engagements and whatnot as well. So I'm hoping to capture some of this. So let's get down to it. So I'd love for you to explain like what a typical week would look like, because most people I think would see a data director or chief data officer probably just running around the building. Without necessarily being clear what's in their week. So could you explain it for us? What does the job entail?
Yeah, sure, absolutely, and I think it's definitely true. Throughout the last kind of few jobs, my team spent the whole time basically pointing out that I have one of the world's hardest diaries to actually find kind of time in. So for me, the first thing is about actually kind of scheduling in that time with the team to make sure that that's kind of blocked out kind of weeks, months in advance, so that actually each week I can start the week by getting an understanding from my stakeholders, what's going on, what's changed, what are the priorities, what do we need to be focused on, and then basically giving myself the time to be able to canvas that back to the kind of team. So we have a kind of core team meeting every week, ranges from kind of an hour plus, depending on what we need to cover. Sometimes we've got people from the team that want to present things, etc. But to me, that's about getting everyone together so that the team feel like they're kind of all joined up, but also they're learning from each other. They're aware of what's going on, and actually kind of nothing is kind of hidden from them. And in between that is kind of one-to-ones with all the team. I've always been a kind of big fan of making sure that all of my direct reports have access to me at least once a week to be able to go through where they are with things, how things are progressing, what's going on, because I'm very conscious that all of a sudden our weeks can be taken up by meetings and work, and all of a sudden you just haven't seen them, sort of thing. So that gives them a kind of defined point where they can run through things. The rest of the week, it kind of varies. I have a lot of kind of catch-ups with stakeholders. So everyone from our CFO, our CEO, kind of managing directors, various people across the business, basically to make sure that what we're doing is aligned to what they're thinking. And similarly, they don't feel like they're being unloved. It's very easy for those stakeholders to assume that either you're not doing anything or what you're doing isn't relevant to them or isn't kind of what they're asking for. And it's a very easy way to find yourself isolated in a business. So to me, that's a critical part of kind of my job. While my team are hopefully producing brilliant things, I'm making sure that I'm kind of managing those stakeholders and making sure that they, A, are coming on that journey with us, but also B, don't feel like anything that they've asked us for or that they've mentioned has been forgotten.
Which of those external groups? Yeah, Matt, which of those external groups are most demanding of you, if you had to generalize?
It completely depends by business.
Okay.
In that I've definitely found that the closer the stakeholders are, the easier it often is. So if you are in an office with stakeholders, it's often much easier than the people that you're having to kind of dial into and speak to remotely. So particularly working in a global capacity, it's a lot more difficult with the ones that are overseas in other territories, purely because they can't just randomly grab you at points. In that I'm always an early bird into the office. And so actually quite regularly, our CFO will grab me at some point pre 9 o'clock to go, can I ask you this? Or what's happening with that? And so therefore, actually, when we catch up, there's less for us to need to go through because he's almost got snippets of information throughout the course of the kind of week or 2 weeks. that's much more difficult if someone is based in the US or in Asia and you're only managing to catch up with them kind of infrequently. I think there's also an element of it depends how much experience with data some of those people are, and therefore kind of how demanding they can be. Some people have come into the business and are used to having almost an entire data setup just for them. And unfortunately, most of the companies I've worked for have always had relatively kind of small data setups versus the volume of work that people want them to do. And so actually you're having to juggle things, and sometimes someone will ask something and it's we can do that for you, but it's going to be weeks, months before we can get onto it. And it's really important for you to kind of build that and kind of help people to understand. So that's a key one for me. And the rest of it is largely made up with meetings. I'm much less hands-on these days than I used to be. Yes, there are odd things where, particularly if someone in the meeting says, could we do X or is Y possible? A lot of the time it's easier for me to spend 5 minutes just going, let's actually just see if we've got the data and it's even vaguely possible, so that I can then say, yep, brief that into X or Y. But half the time the team are so busy on things, they wouldn't be able to get onto it straight away. So a lot of it is attending meetings as a kind of member of the data team, data expertise, to be able to basically sense check that what we're doing as a business is considering data, and ultimately we're setting ourselves up for success.
Got it. Well, I would have gone on to like the challenges of the role. So what I was hearing though is spending face time with key stakeholders actually is like something that overcomes one challenge. So geographical or just general distance from people you're working with would be a challenge. Probably like filtering work and making sure that you understand requirements before it hits your team. Are there any other challenges to like, that you would flag, like someone needs to know if they've got the opportunity to do this kind of job?
I think the other big one is as you end up creating a data team, particularly if you're covering everything from the worlds of kind of data architecture and engineering all the way through to kind of analytics, data science, reporting, is how do you make sure that the team are all joined up? It's very easy for you to have an analytics team that promise something to the business, but actually they've got a dependency on your data engineers to actually ingest some data to kind of update the way that the data model is built. And how do you actually get those guys connected so that you can go, right, actually that and that needs to happen first before we can get on to this? And therefore, if something is super urgent, how do you get people aligned? So yeah, to me, that's definitely one of the challenges, particularly as those teams grow, because you've almost got kind of individual kind of groups of people working on things that they think are important. And actually, how do you make sure that overall you're all working towards the same goals, sort of thing? So I think that's a key one. I think on the kind of stakeholders and the kind of business demand side of things, the biggest challenge is it doesn't matter how large your team is, you can't be in every meeting. And the problem with data is it exists absolutely everywhere. And half the time people don't realize that when they're talking about a change, they're talking about something new, they're talking about changing or doing something, it has impacts on data. And part of that for us is how do you educate those people? How do you improve the data literacy, the data fluency of a business? Because ultimately, the more familiar with those things they can be, the better. In that, to me, it's a real positive if a senior person in our people team comes to us and says, we're doing X. Is that going to impact any of my reports? Is that going to impact anything that I'm doing? Will we capture that information? Because it shows that they're learning and they're starting to think about it, rather than them launch something, change something, and come to us and say, how's this performing? And you go, how's what performing? You didn't tell us about it. We haven't even looked at how we're going to kind of ingest that data or kind of capture it. It may not be going anywhere.
Yeah, I suppose sometimes you feel like either the most informed in the business because the data's at the center, or sometimes something happens outside of it and it's like you're the last to know, and it's created a data problem. So I've seen both sides of that. Matt, what are the fun parts of this job? Like, what's the exciting bit? What happens? What happens that makes you get on that 5 a.m. train every day?
Well, I think for me, the reason that I ended up in data was I did a degree in chemistry. I fell out of university and ultimately ended up working for a marketing agency because I didn't want to do chemistry anymore once I finished a 4-year degree in it. And actually, I found myself looking at things and going, our suppliers aren't giving us a real analysis of why something is performing or isn't performing. All they're saying is, this didn't work, this did work, without really understanding the who, why, what is actually kind of going on. And so as I worked my way through that agency, I found myself analysing more and more data and going, well, actually, this is working. Where's the point that it isn't? What is it that we aren't understanding? And to me, that's great, because half the time you're bringing completely new things to the table for people where they hadn't considered it, in terms of who are these customers, what's going on, where is it, kind of the point that actually it's kind of breaking down what's actually going wrong. And to me, the kind of fruit of our labours of our team is kind of the really exciting stuff, because sometimes there are things that you present and the business literally just go, wow, kind of where did that come from? We did a huge piece of kind of external market intelligence building at Pret, and in one of the board meetings, our chairman made the comment of, what genius came up with this logic? And you kind of go, well, brilliant. If that's what we're getting in terms of kind of the positives, people always talk about data, and kind of particularly when you start talking about analytics, data science being magic, and actually kind of being able to demonstrate something that people didn't think was possible, to me is really exciting, and particularly make a real business difference. I think the other aspect to me is I have quite a large team, and every business it's kind of grown and grown and grown. It's seeing that team develop and seeing them achieve things that actually kind of 6 months, a year ago, they wouldn't have thought was possible. So kind of, to me, I was in that position kind of 10, 15 years ago, and there wasn't the support and the kind of industry that there is now. And so actually being able to see them develop and actually making sure they have those kind of elements of support, and they can actually kind of work effectively and kind of continue to kind of get better and better is absolutely great.
Well, Matt, you've set my next question up perfectly, because I wanted to ask a question about you personally. My question would have been, you talked about you fell out of chemistry, and those technical details will have helped you when you started analysing things. But my question was going to be, are there some skills that you'd flag that have just like served you well throughout your beginnings up into these senior positions? And also, could I ask, is there anything that you discovered was a bit of a blind spot, perhaps, and you've had to really actively work on to make sure you can do the job well? So two sides of it, please. What skill do you use all the time that you feel strong with, and what have you had to develop?
I think the kind of first one in terms of the strength is probably around problem solving, in that it's kind of, I'm very much always looking at things and going kind of, how can I break that down? How could that work differently? What does that mean? And kind of, if I talk to my parents, there are various stories they can tell me from when I was a kid of things that kind of, that isn't the way I would have approached that. And actually kind of, it's that approach of going kind of, this must be solvable. How do we do it? Sort of thing. And to me, that's been critical. And actually, as I hire, it's something that I always look for in people, is going kind of, actually, are they able to use their initiative? Are they able to go, how do I think outside the box here, and go, there must be a way for me to attempt to get a solution here, even if it's making some assumptions and kind of working around the edges. I think the other one for me has been around helping people to kind of go, the biggest challenge you have with stakeholders is they don't really get the data. What they get is, I've got this problem, what's the answer to it? And actually, for me, being able to take any data or any outputs and actually explain that in a really simple way that makes sense to the business, so that they can go, that's what it's actually going to do for me. That's how it's going to kind of impact. That's what I can change. That's what the next action I can take is. To me, has been kind of critical. And it's definitely something that has helped me to kind of climb up the ladder, because ultimately it's meant that more and more people put you in front of senior people, because actually they're comfortable that you will explain it in a language that makes sense to them, rather than coming in with some really complex data model and trying to explain why you choose this modeling technique rather than that modeling technique, or why you use these variables rather than those, which ultimately doesn't mean a lot to those kind of senior stakeholders.
Good. Well, Matt, you're nearly through to the end of your first interview. Congratulations. Thank you for your insights as to the life of a chief data officer. Ladies and gents, this has been Emails Like Team Spirit.